dipped it into the pot of black ink. Then felt she should explain when Betty gave her a questioning frown. All this talk of pots and pans reminds me when Alan proposed to me as he stood atop the pots and pans counter. It seems such an age ago now, she added wistfully. Betty smiled. It's one of my most memorable moments of working here at Woolworths. Then Maureen burst into song and the customers joined in, she added with glee. Such happy times we had before this damnable war started. At least I still have the set of pans that Mr. Benfield gave us as a wedding present. It was a struggle, but I held on to them for grim life when the scouts came to the door collecting utensils to build Spitfires. Dear Mr. Benfield, Betty smiled, reflecting on her predecessor who had left the employ of F.W. Woolworth to join the army. I was most upset to hear that he'd succumbed to measles while serving in the Pay Corps. It doesn't seem right that a serving soldier should pass away from something our children suffer with. She ran her hand gently across the leather-bound ledger. He taught me so much about running this store. Why, the first pages in this ledger contain his copperplate handwriting. I tried to be as neat in my early endeavours to enter the numbers of hours and pay earned by our staff, but try as I might, my handwriting isn't as good as his. Sarah nodded, hoping against hope that Betty did not notice the large ink stain she'd left in the ledger when the temperamental fountain pen had leaked onto the lined pages. She hurriedly reached for blotting paper, doing her utmost to stem the flow. Mr. Benfield would not have been amused. Now, I must crack on and make that telephone call. Then perhaps we could spare 5 minutes to go to the staff canteen for a cup of tea and a slice of the bread I can smell. Be with you in a minute. Sarah smiled to herself as she copied names and numbers onto the front of each envelope before blotting the ink and placing them in alphabetical order. Sarah thought about how much she enjoyed helping Betty in her small office above the bustling Woolworths store. To be able to pop in to help out with paperwork made her feel she was still part of the happy band of Woolies workers. Was it really 6 years since she had first stood with a group of eager young women in this very office, listening to Betty Billington giving her serious talk about the responsibility of being a member of staff and how they would all be given an arithmetic test? It was also the day that she met Alan Gilbert, and her glorious romance began as the dark days of war grew steadily closer. Who would have thought that Alan would now be a pilot in the RAF, and that they would be the proud parents of beautiful 4-year-old Georgina, with another child on the way? Sarah placed a protective hand over her swollen stomach. A son would be lovely. A son who looked just like his father, and who would live in peaceful times rather than this awful war. Why, if what her Nan, Ruby, said was true, the war could be over by Christmas. There again, she said the same every year. With a smile on her face, she looked to where Betty was deep in conversation on the black Bakelite telephone. Her boss seemed to have a glow about her, which Sarah put down to being married to the handsome Douglas. Yes, it would be contentment, something that all newlywed women felt in those first few years after their wedding. Betty suddenly stopped talking and frowned at what she was being told. A look of horror crossed her face. "Oh, my God!" she exclaimed. "It can't be true!" Making a hurried goodbye, after asking to be kept informed, Betty replaced the heavy receiver in its cradle and turned to Sarah. "There's been an incident at the Woolworths branch in New Cross. We don't know if it's a gas explosion or enemy action." She sunk down onto the spare seat opposite Sarah. The young woman's face had turned a ghostly shade of white. "Is it serious? Are there casualties?" Sarah whispered, afraid of what the reply would be. Betty nodded her head slowly. "There must be." "Must?" Sarah asked, hardly daring to breathe. "What do you mean, must?" "There's nothing left of the store." "But Mum and Maureen were going there." She looked at the clock on the wall opposite the desk. "They could have been in the store." Betty reached across the desk and took Sarah's trembling hand. "Please,